Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 9 of Ask Us Anything. I'm Mark Graban, the VP of Improvement and Innovation Services here at KaiNexus.
And I'm Greg Jacobson, CEO and co-founder of KaiNexus.
So we'll jump right in. This is on the theme of Ask Us Anything, and we get some anything type questions. So once you're busy guys. Where was your last vacation? And maybe a good question was when. Greg, when do you find some time for this?
Well, I just got back from Colorado. As some of you might know, we have offices in Austin and Dallas, and when we're talking about July, August, in those places, it is hot, 100 degrees every day. So always try to get up to the mountains of Colorado in the summer, and just had a great time. I mean, highs of 80, lows of 55, hiking, enjoying. And in the modern world we live in, I was actually able to kind of keep up with everything, and I did a 50% work and 50% play. So I was working on Mondays, Thursdays, and half of Fridays out of Colorado, and playing on the weekends and Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So it was a lot of fun. What about you, Mark?
Well, good. Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, I also get away occasionally. My wife and I just got back yesterday. We had sort of a long 5-day weekend in Oregon in the Willamette Valley wine country. So very little work, but a lot of touring around. The weather was beautiful. Like you said, getting out of the Texas heat was a big part of that plan. So we're going to move into other continuous improvement topics, but there's one other question that came in, maybe kind of related. Here's a good bridge. What book have you most recently read? Greg?
Great question, and I'm finding myself never reading just one book. So currently reading 3 books. One was completed, and that was my fun book. Adolescence of P1 was my cousin recommended it, kind of in this offhanded comment. We were talking about artificial intelligence, and this was one of the early 1970s first forays into that. A lot of fun if you're into kind of light reading and into the kind of sci-fi, in the kind of computer-esque type of things, but P1 was this IBM computer that basically jumped and became a mind of its own and started connecting all the computers, and obviously it's as relevant today as it was 40 years ago when it was written.
Forward thinking, yeah.
Also reading Charles Duhigg, his second book, and remember his first book, The Power of Habit. Mark and I, we talk about it all the time. The psychology of an organization is the most difficult thing to capture in Lean. That's why people say you are a Lean practitioner, you practice Lean. It's not about the tools, because the soft things actually are that kind of that glue, if you will. And I think you find the soft things oftentimes in places where you don't expect it. And Charles Duhigg is one of those authors that writes about it. Power of Habit's great, but Smarter, Faster, Better, I've kind of pulled it up here for everyone to see, is his second book. A lot of fun. He's talking about 8 characteristics of people that are doing things smarter, faster, better. So he talks about motivation, teams, focus, talked about aviation, and I always just find it amazing where these aviation concepts and nuclear concepts and Lean concepts find their way into the world, because these are just normal principles, the way humans really should behave in kind of organism-esque ways in companies. So highly recommend it so far, about halfway through. And then the other one we were kind of prepping for this, you said, is a classic. And it was a classic perhaps for people, but when this came out, I would have just been starting residency in emergency medicine, and so I wasn't reading it, but Jim Collins' Good to Great, where he talks about kind of 7 characteristics of companies that completely outperform the market by 5 and 10 and 15x over 15-year periods, so not over these short terms. And I'm really talking about first opening chapter. Guess what it's about? Leadership.
Yeah.
Have we heard that before? So what about you, Mark?
Well, so I start a lot of books. One that I actually got all the way through and finished is a book from actually 1994 called Comeback. It won the Pulitzer Prize, written by 2 journalists, so squarely nonfiction. You can see a car plant there. But it's a book from '94 looking back at the auto industry in the early 80s as Toyota and Honda were entering the U.S. There's a lot of early history going through the early 90s about General Motors and Toyota and their joint venture factory in California called NUMMI, which opened, I believe, in '84. And so, yeah, at this point, it's history. I started in the auto industry in 1995, right after a lot of this had happened. But I found it really fascinating because it talks about, there's a couple chapters about culture change and leadership, and why did GM not better take advantage of the opportunities to learn from Toyota? And why? So I had a chance to reach out. I did a podcast interview with one of the guys who's featured in a couple of chapters, Steve Barra. He was one of the first GM people to go work at Toyota, and it makes me think about the healthcare field here in the year 2016. Why is culture change challenging? Why do people sometimes stick their heads in the sand when there are competitive challenges? And a lot of it comes down to culture and leadership, and I guess that's a key part of improvement in what we do here at KaiNexus. So I found that book not just about interesting history, but it was making me think about what's happening today.
Yeah, and I think kind of referencing one of the other webinars that we've had in the past, Mark Jabin with the Jaben, an ER doctor, really got into the science of change and how kind of the brain works, and we're kind of getting into psychology or the stuff that's really hard to wrap your head around, a bit beyond a 5 whys or a fishbone where you can kind of see it and touch it and work your hands through it. But the other stuff is arguably harder, and it's like becoming enlightened, if you're a Buddhist monk. I mean, that's just, there's not like a 10-step process to do that, Yeah. So, interesting stuff.
Yeah. So we have a question here from Raul. What key company culture, we're going to each pick one element. There's many, we could talk about this all day. What's one element of company culture that promotes continuous improvement? Greg, you go first.
So the first thing that came to my mind, because Mark was like, we could literally spend the entire hour just on this one question, great question, but the first word that came to my mind was trust. I think an organization that doesn't have trust, that doesn't have, the leaders eat last, Simon Sinek, high oxytocin levels, is an organization that's not going to experiment, that's not going to hand over the kind of controls, not saying we're going to get out of the cockpit, but just allowing people to come to the improvement table to participate. And they're organizations that people are really focused on themselves and making sure that they've got a job the next day instead of kind of not worrying. I trust everyone I work with. I'm secure here. And therefore, I'm going to give my ideas freely, and we're going to, come up, and we're going to ultimately, I always say that what does innovation look like at a microscopic level? It looks like continuous improvement. I mean, that's innovative companies are doing this really well, and those are companies that have high levels of trust, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would add, trust is not just something that exists; it's something that needs to be developed. And I think if we have a starting point where there's low trust between, where employees don't trust their leaders, a lot of times leaders don't trust their employees, somebody's got to break that cycle, and I think that's got to be leadership, to start doing some things to build and develop trust. One of, I think, the key aspects of a company culture is a commitment to no layoffs due to lean or no layoffs due to continuous improvement. That's a way of trying to build and demonstrate trust. And leaders might say, no one's going to lose their job because of lean, and the employees might not believe them. Why? Because there's no trust yet. So that I think sometimes that needs to be a process. I think leaders can build trust by showing humility and trying to. The point I was going to make was the idea of getting past the notion that as a leader you have to have all the answers, or you're the only one who can have answers, or you're the only one that can take action to drive improvement. So I think working together with your employees to ask questions, to understand problems, can build trust. And I think asking them what they think we can do to solve these problems or to make things better can build trust in both directions. Leaders can show, hey, I trust you as an employee. I'm not leaving you totally on your own. We're going to work together. And leaders can build trust in their employees by seeing generally the employees have really good ideas. They deal with problems on a daily basis, and with some lean concepts and some coaching and, again, working together, I think that's one of the really important things to start building a continuous improvement culture.
Great. Let's move on.
Okay, another question from Curtis. For more than 10 years, our full-time OE, or probably means Operational Excellence Group, has followed a ground-up approach, or what we might call bottom-up improvement. A combination of the competitive climate in our industry and some recent success we've had with rapid Kaizen events, I assume he means events, have helped senior leaders see that they need lean education so they can be active lean leaders. What do you recommend we do and avoid doing to train them well? Maybe I'll take that first. It sounds like they've started participating in those Kaizen events or rapid improvement events. I think that's a key thing. Leaders need to learn by doing. They need to be involved in problem solving. They need to learn the PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust cycle. They need to understand whether you call it A3 thinking or rapid improvement events. I've seen it be really effective where you have leaders start solving problems in their own work before they start asking their employees, say, hey, you all go improve things. I think leaders need to learn by doing. They can see that problem solving isn't always easy, that it's not always a straightforward linear process, and I think that helps build understanding and allows them to be better coaches for their employees. That would be one thing to do or continue doing, getting involved, not just sitting and listening about lean or reading about lean.
That's great. To me, I think what I can contribute the most to this question is there's a mantra in medicine that talks about see one, do one, teach one, right? And I think that it speaks to the fact that it's really difficult for, I think, adult learners to kind of sit down and learn for a year and then try to apply that. So that see one, do one, teach one kind of recognizes that you could kind of compartmentalize and break things up into really small chunks, then kind of watch it, then you're going to learn a different level when you do it, and then you're going to even learn probably the most deep comprehension of something is when you start teaching it. And in college, I was a TA and a tutor for a couple of different classes, and even though I rocked in those classes when I took them, I really didn't fully comprehend the material until I realized I was actually going to teach this to other people, and it gave me such a deep appreciation. So I think it's just in time, right? It's don't overload people, give them a small, have them apply it, have them teach it. I also think there's not going to be one answer here, right? I think there's going to be some places where pulling a person out of the workflow for a full day makes a lot of sense. There's going to be other places where that's completely unrealistic. So try to break it up into 5 or 10 minute, quick little lesson. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think the one challenge with see one, do one, teach one, or I think it's not always one, but it might be see a few, do a few, teach one. But I think people, and especially at executive levels, I found are really uncomfortable with the idea of not being really good at something. There's that expertise trap. And I find executives become executives because they're experts in something. They're experts in medicine. They're experts in nursing. They hopefully have become experts in management as they've risen through the ranks. And lean puts people into a really awkward discomfort zone. And I found that can be one of the biggest challenges. The lean concepts are simple, but letting go of some of those sort of mental traps, not wanting to admit, I don't know the answer, but let's go figure it out. I mean, I think those are things that require coaching. So I guess that's my other point to Curtis's question. Lean is learned by doing, but with a qualified coach. And the executives need to say, yes, I'm willing to have you coach me. I think a leader has to give that permission, especially if it's a lean leader or facilitator or sensei or whatever term you use. That's a few notches down in the organization. You have to sort of get past that formal power dynamic, sort of like people talk about in aviation safety and the cockpit power dynamic or the operating room power dynamic. There's a power dynamic in organizations more broadly.
In your aviation example made me think of an analogy of how I like to think of improvement coaches, but it's almost like the improvement coach or the improvement team is sitting in the control tower, and they're talking to hundreds of planes, and each one of those planes might be a pocket of improvement, a department, a leader, and they're just kind of touching base. Hey, Mark, where are you at? What's your altitude? Cool, this and that. All right, so we're gonna recommend you do this and go on this flight path and this, and then let the person go, and then check in with them again, and in a normal interval, if you will. And I think kind of trying to create that dynamic that I can help be your guide into a new way to do things versus I'm going to tell you how for you to do your job better. May help people kind of accept that kind of role where I'm the boss, I'm wearing the boss hat, but I'm actually going to be taking advice from someone that's a couple notches down. So
yeah. Okay, so we have another question here from Sam, and I think he was reacting to a blog post of yours, Greg, and I'll make the plug. Go to blog.kinexus.com if you want to read blog posts that we all write. But Sam asked, I was wondering if you, Dr. Jacobson, or Mark could expand on your comment, quote, healthcare is a decade or more behind other high-risk industries in its attention to ensuring basic safety. Some say medical errors are now the third leading cause of death in the United States. Some estimate it as roughly 250,000 people per year. Has any other high-risk industry ever had a fraction of that many deaths? I understand that this number is an estimate, but it seems like healthcare maybe is more behind than a decade. Could you elaborate on your thoughts? So, Greg.
This is a really complicated question. So I think in order to kind of simplify it down to a short, concise answer, we're going to have to just make some assumptions and just kind of go with me a little bit. Whether the number is 250,000 or whether the number is 5,000, I kind of don't care. I remember being an intern and sitting in a chest pain class or a lecture about chest pain and being asked the question, so Greg, what is the acceptable miss percentage for heart attacks for an ER doctor? And you kind of think about it. Okay, well, it's really hard to tell if someone's having a heart attack. Sometimes the EKGs are normal. Sometimes all the blood work is normal, but they're still having a heart attack. The right answer, and luckily I said the right answer, is zero. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, that zero. Now, we understand that that's probably not going to happen. In your career, you're going to miss these things. So, whether it's 250,000 people or whether it's 10,000 people, I don't really care about the answer. What I care about is the number that we should be striving for is zero. Whether we can get there or not is a different kind of topic. Mm-hmm. Number two, I don't think you can really kind of make it a complete apples to apples. We're a little bit apples to oranges, right? Because yes, nuclear power obviously isn't killing 250,000 people a year. Yes, aviation is not killing 250,000 people a year. I don't think you can say, okay, well, so the numbers in healthcare, because everyone is engaging in healthcare, right? And people do die as part of the life process, right? So it's inevitable that there's going to be some kind of healthcare going on, and a person's going to die, and whether there was a direct relationship or not, that's why I said I don't want to care about the numbers. But what I do think is whether we're a decade behind, whether we're 2 decades behind, we're behind, and we should recognize that we're behind, and we should start doing things that other industries have figured out. I mean, I was first introduced to kind of aviation, high reliability organization type behaviors, which directly come out of aviation and nuclear. I was first introduced to that in 2001, 2002 at Vanderbilt. They were, I think, very early in that process.
The original Institute of Medicine report about medical errors and harm and death came out in 1999.
Right.
Wow.
So I don't 100% know. Maybe, Mark, you know about this. I know this is not necessarily lean, but we do feel that these behaviors and these practices are extremely synergistic, and organizations should be doing all of these things. I don't know exactly how long, aviation had been practicing those, but certainly in the 70s, planes were dropping out of the sky at pretty regular frequency, and they were like basically recognizing, hey, if we really want, I mean, it was probably a business decision as much as anything, right? If we really want for people that this is the main way people are going to get around, we're going to have to get these planes to stop dropping out of the sky, right?
Right. Planes were colliding, hundreds of people being killed, and it was coming down to things like human error, hierarchies in the cockpit of the second officer not speaking up to the captain. So yeah, there were lessons learned there, and to your point, Greg, we can set the goal of 0, but yet at the same time realize humans are not perfect, and I think that the overlap between the patient safety movement and the lean movement would say, people aren't perfect, don't expect them to be superhuman. Recognize the human factors and the risk of when people get fatigued, people forget things, people aren't communicating clearly, and trying to build better systems instead of saying, hey, don't make mistakes.
Exactly. And recognizing that we have a problem, whether that number is, the number isn't 300. The number is certainly in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, and maybe even in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
So.
And these are all estimates with these numbers, whether it was 44,000 or 400,000 or 100,000. There's two things that really interest me about healthcare. One is there's a lack of transparency, a lack of reporting, and that's for a number of reasons. Fear of lawsuits, reputation, other issues. Aviation has non-punitive mandatory reporting systems, and many have advocated for that in healthcare. But healthcare sort of plays both sides of the card. They don't report, so there's not good data. Then when people do estimates, they poo-poo the estimates. And so, well, you don't know, because, well, come on. You can resolve the estimate problem if there were more transparency.
Right.
And I think the other thing that's interesting is if you look at the auto industry, Toyota had problems a few years ago. They were estimated to have killed maybe 13 people. In the U.S., General Motors had ignition switch problems. They were estimated to kill maybe 35 people. And those CEOs got hauled in front of Congress, and whether getting questioned or lectured by committees and televised hearings really does anything to improve or not. I find it interesting that healthcare, that issue doesn't get the same level of attention, regardless of whether the number is 40 or 400 or 400,000.
Right. And it's when an airplane crashes, everyone knows. Mm-hmm. And let's be honest.
There's no covering that up.
Right, there's no covering that up. And when a medical error occurs, sometimes not even all the people on the team that is taking care of the patient is aware that happened, let alone the system in total, or the family, or they were kind of already sick already, and they already had a disease that had a 25% mortality. So yeah, we kind of messed up on the dosage, but did it really cause? And so what it's going to take is an environment where people are expected to report, and when they do report, I'm using this word at the fear of it sounding wrong, but it should be celebrated. They shouldn't be scorned, and they shouldn't be punished. They need to feel very safe saying, hey, made this mistake, made this error, let's look at this. The chances are it's going to be the Swiss cheese model. It wasn't just one person, right? And then people, kind of gather around that in a way that makes people, and I get it, it's going to sound weird, but makes people feel good about uncovering and solving these things.
Well, and I think the issue of, if you think about aviation, there's no hiding a plane crash. There would be hiding of a near miss, a near collision, a near mishap. And that non-punitive reporting system pretty much requires people to report the near miss, so problem solving can occur, learning can occur, future prevention can occur. And I think that's a huge opportunity in healthcare. There are ratios of, for every instance of harm, there are 8 to 10 near misses. And we need to catch things when it's at the level of unsafe conditions or near misses before it escalates to harm or death.
And Mark, you may know about this more, but my understanding of that rule is if a pilot or a team member in aviation doesn't report it in a certain period of time, then they're like liable for it. But if they report it, they're okay. But there's some kind of impression that like as long as you're going through this system, you are like 100% protected. When you veer away from the system is when you can get in trouble. Yeah. So they're really incentivizing to talk about these things, and they can find patterns and start looking at if things can really be systemed out, can be processed out of errors, can be error-proofed.
Yeah. All right. So we've got about 5 minutes. Let's try to get 2 more questions in. One is from Fozzie, who is watching live. So hello. How can we measure the level of employees' engagement? What measures can we use? Is there an assessment tool? I'll take a step at this first. I think, and KaiNexus supports this, so Greg, maybe you can talk to that. I mean, there's surveys, and I think surveys are helpful. I think a key measure of engagement or morale or whatever you call it is the number of ideas that people are bringing forward. If I were to pick one single measure, I guess one would be, are people showing up to work? So what are your absenteeism rates? What are your turnover rates? Those can be measured more frequently, more real time than the surveys. But I think another key thing is, are people coming forward with ideas, and then what percentage of those are being implemented? I think that's it's easy to measure, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I'm going to just focus on the KaiNexus side of this because I think Mark is absolutely correct. Turnover rates and absenteeism. There's probably lots of other kind of behavioral things that can be looked at that can measure this. But I mean, we have an entire section of our reporting area all about engagements and the type of things that we are reporting on. That's just by the fact that you're using KaiNexus, we're able to capture this data at a click of a button and show you. And so our improvement coaches, our customers, the people that are driving kind of the improvement work at the individual organizations, use this stuff all the time to figure out, what departments are engaged and what areas and what teams are. Number of OIs, opportunities for improvements, or whatever your organization has labeled those improvements. Number of improvements per person annualized. And we know that numbers below 1 are really bad. A lot of organizations do really well with numbers between 1 and 2, and really high-performing organizations are doing greater than 10 to 15 per year per person. And we have organizations that are doing that as well. We have the ability to look at if you've used the system or if you've logged into the system, and we know what percent. So those are very easy ways to determine engagement, because if you're logging into the system, you're reading about improvement work. If you're using the system, you're engaged in that improvement process. We also can show what percent of your population, of your company employees, are actually involved in some role in an improvement. And so we obviously like to see the number of people that have no role or no engagement in any improvement or in any project in the system. We like that number to be very close to 0, right? And we find in highly engaged organizations that many people are involved in many different improvements or projects, and so they'll see their high-end users, that percentage to be very high. So lots of different ways to kind of slice and dice that. We know, for example, also in the system you can really see, this department, this plant is doing 10 OIs per 10 improvements per person per year. Wow, they're really engaged, but we can kind of start slicing and dicing that and go, there's actually only a pocket of about 20 people that are representing the activity for 500 people. That's not very engaged. And so in KaiNexus, we kind of bring all that, very easy to be seen, and I think those are all kind of critical if we're talking about engagement in continuous improvement activity. And we know, obviously, the more you engage in continuous improvement activity, the greater the culture you'll have of continuous improvement. So
it becomes a very self-perpetuating cycle. Yes. Engagement, I think, like trust, doesn't just exist. It has to be created. You have to work at it. Leaders need to work at it. So as we wrap up here, I guess my final point would be, if people bemoan a lack of trust, you need to ask, what are you doing to build trust? I've heard people complain about a lack of engagement. Our doctors aren't engaged. They'll say, what are you doing to engage your doctors? Like, don't be passive. It's
Right.
It's an active term, and once you get that ball rolling, then it becomes very self-perpetuating. But at some point, we've got to stop the old dysfunctional cycles. Again, I think that's leadership's responsibility to say, okay, enough. We're going to kind of make a clean break, try to work on building a better culture and working together to do so. So that is, I think, the time we have. Fozzie, I think we'll start the next Ask Us Anything in about a month with your second question. William had a question about getting engagement and freeing up time. We do have a webinar about how to create time for continuous improvement. I would suggest go to our webinar library at webinar.kinexus.com, or no, I think it's actually kinexus.com/webinars. Sorry, or go to kinexus.com, look for the on-demand webinar library and look for that. I have our next webinar. I'll make a quick plug on August 23rd, a presentation by Sam McPherson, who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. He's not only a former Toyota guy, but he was an Army Green Beret and a Special Forces trainer, and just really fascinating background. He's going to be talking about the art and science of lean leadership. So I encourage you, again, kinexus.com/webinars. You can sign up for that on August 23rd. So Greg, do you have a final thought to leave everyone on?
A simple thank you, Mark, for putting on a great webinar season. Our 2016 webinar series has been unbelievable. We in KaiNexus, our motto, our mantra, our mission is to spread continuous improvement, and it takes a lot of different shapes. One of the things that we pride ourselves is I think we are producing a really good mind share, a really good library of different webinars and ebooks and blogs to get you thinking. I can't tell you, almost every week people are saying, oh, we use your blog all the time, and it gives me fodder to think. Sometimes we just send it to everyone, hey, read this, and we try to keep them short and concise and to the point. So please take a look at all of the different literature and webinars, et cetera, that we're doing. We're spending a lot of time as a company and a lot of energy doing that. So
yeah, there's a lot of great stuff, not just for our customers, but people who are part of the broader continuous improvement community, whether that's in healthcare or manufacturing or services, lean and other methodologies. We invite you, if this is your first time watching one of our webinars, like Greg said, check out our YouTube channel. You find our website, kinexus.com. Look for us on social media. And we want to thank you for taking time to watch today.
Have a great day, guys. Thanks so much.